Morning, everybody. We've got a really interesting session today, so hopefully you'll find it quite insightful. I can see a few more people joining on, so I'll kick off and see where we get to. So today we have a demo with Graham, which essentially will be exploring how we can analyse NSS scores using segmentation and how that data can be used to drive improved student satisfaction. But just before that, if we go into the next slide, we thought it'd be fun just to kick off with a bit of a conversation about how we can use segmentation in our lives through something that at least I know I eat regularly, sweets. So if we just go on to the next slide. So if we look at these different types of sweets and think about how we might segment them into different categories, I don't know if anyone wants to come off of mute or pop in the chat how you might think to segment sweets differently or how you'd categorize them. If anyone wants to shout out or pop it in the chat or keep an eye on it. By colour, nice, that's what we thought. I've definitely got that preference, prefer the red ones to the green or yellows for sure.
Shape, I would say.
Yeah, very true. Texture, yeah, that's another one. Size, yeah, always important. Get the big like gobstoppers going. Perfect, amazing. Now if we just pop onto the next slide, Graham. So yeah, some of the ones we came into, yeah, chocolate, colour. We also said, just go through them, said colour, texture, and also shape. So a few of the ones that you guys shouted out, and calories, yeah, always important. So if we think about that and how we segment them into different things, we pop onto the next slide. One more. Yeah, so we've got those kind of, what are the ingredients, the calories, the sugar content, the flavouring of them, smell, how popular they are. And when you think that you can even just segment sweets, that obviously a lot of people just like, it's not surprising that varies in how they're bought or how they're enjoyed, but also in this context of say, for example, universities, how we can expect student satisfaction to be valued and how we segment those different things of universities into that. Now for universities, if we just pop on one more, that could be, you know, the location, subject specialisms, the percentage of low income students, etc. But what we've kind of just highlighted, and I know it's a bit of fun, but each segmentation really needs to be considered for how we then analyse that student satisfaction data and what you can do to improve on that student satisfaction or improve the outcome that you're looking to achieve for your students. Now, I won't steal all of Graham's thunder because he'll go into this a lot more in a minute. But just before that, I thought we'd do a little bit of background into HE Hub and Crimson for anyone that's new. So for those of you that are new to Higher Education Hub, this community is created to bring together our peers in the higher education sector through sessions with business leaders and to really just start those discussions around the relevant themes and demos of technology. And the goal really is to try and break down those business challenges and opportunities, as well as the technology that supports them. And it's really what we're looking to get is really collaborative. So if there's anything that you guys on the call want to hear or talk about a little bit more, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's where we want to get to really, is that this is a partnership and a model for you and created by us for you. So if we just move on one slide more, a bit more into Crimson quickly. So our goal and mission statement is on the screen here. So it's to unite people, processes and technology to solve your toughest business challenges. And that's something that we really try and champion in all our engagements with our customers, as we know that kind of delivering that iterative and that really agile technique helps you see value quicker and helps validate your business cases and improve that user adoption across all of the technology that you might be looking to explore. Now, we celebrated our 20th birthday this year, so big milestone for us, and we are a Microsoft Gold partner. And we work across, on the screen there, you can see a few of our sectors that we work in. So from higher education all the way to local regional government and into housing and our UK home builder customers. And the goal with all of these is to realise the opportunity within Microsoft technology. So we have technology practices all the way from Azure and Dynamics 365 into your modern workplace and Power Apps and into the data and that Power BI consultancy that we're going to talk a little bit more about today. And then just finally on us, so how we like to differentiate across the sector. So just one slide more. So we're really lucky to work with a number of higher education customers, and we've collated, I suppose, technology kit bag really with our skills and expertise in the sector to build solution accelerators across the Microsoft stack. And the goal really is to use that technology and our experience with the sector to deliver intelligent customer experiences, that kind of optimized business processes and actionable data insights to really help bridge that gap between the business problems to the technology and then to the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So that's a little bit about Crimson. If you go on to the next slide, we thought it'd be good to do a little bit more of an introduction into us and get to know us personally a little bit more. So Graham, you're on the left, so I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. So obviously none of these are pictures of me, but one of my passions outside of data insights is wildlife photography. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the things I go out and see at the weekends and enjoy doing. Weirdly, it's a bit of a strange connect, but I actually see quite a bit of an overlap with data insights. I go on long walks and sort of try and tell the story of the walk through the pictures, and that's similar with data insights. You're trying to tell a story that leads you to the insight and ultimately outcomes. So there is sort of a strange connect between the two things. Over to you, Madeline.
Yeah, mine's gone polar opposite. I've got pictures of myself on the screen. So I don't know what that says about me, but so I'm a new business consultant at Crimson. I moved from Kent to London recently this year. I do really enjoy travelling, but I think like most of us, it's been mostly staycations this year. So trying to make the most out of the British countryside, which is always nice. But if anyone's got any suggestions of where to travel to, let me know. I'm always keen for that. I also live just around the corner from my sister, who has recently got new kittens. So like Graham, I don't have the skill in capturing the pictures of them. So you might be able to see at the top right one, it's a tiny little cat sat on my lap, but that is about the only picture I've ever got of her. So I need to get some of Graham's techniques. But yeah, that's a little bit about us. I'll pass over to Graham to kind of get into the demo. But if anyone's got any questions throughout on anything at all, please just raise your hand, come off mute and shout it out. Or if you're more comfortable just typing it in the chat, I'll keep an eye on it and interrupt Graham for you if that's better. But yeah, just keep the conversation going throughout and we'll go from there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Madeline. Any questions at this point before we get started?
I like the suggestion of where to travel already. That's what I need. Thank you.
Well, I will show I am a real person. I do actually hide behind my camera, which is why it was pictures of wildlife. There aren't actually many pictures of me. So, but hopefully you can now see a Power BI dashboard. That's now on screen.
Just come off.
Say that again, sorry?
I think your screen's just stopped sharing.
Oh, I'll share again.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, perfect. So just a little bit of an overview before I get into the details. We basically use HESA data and NSS data. Both have used the latest data available. This is all real data, but you'll see in there are HE provider level information. We've anonymized it and we've randomly changed the names. And there is no relationship between the name that has been given and the name of university. So I think there is one called Toontown University. That is not Newcastle. It is just pure random. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that. What we wanted to do is we know that NSS is really important. It's really important to try and improve where you can and continually to improve student satisfaction, and ultimately have that drive through to really good outcomes for the students. And no doubt that many of you are already comparing and looking deeply into your NSS scores and comparing yourself to other HE providers. And you might have different ways of doing that. It might be regional, it might be some of the groupings like Russell Group, etc. We wanted to try and take a different angle and see if there was another way of basically creating some comparators that really made sense from a logical data point of view, and really enables you to get into much more detail of the sort of insights you could tease out and see where you could improve NSS even further. So we've used the HESA data, and I'll go into the detail of the actual data that we've used shortly, but we've gone into that to try and create these logical segments. So basically trying to think of, using a series of clustering techniques, thinking back to, the demonstration with the suites. Obviously you can categorize each one on an individual point, but actually if you want to look at multiple inputs, you can use some clustering techniques to try and put together HE providers that are very similar in behavior from an input perspective. And from that, we've created 7 segments. Now, we've tried to come up with names that sort of explain them. Please don't get too bogged down on the actual name we've given, but we've come up with these. So we've got extensive resources, local access, what we've called mid-size, research focused, specialist, teaching focused, and widening access. And you'll see that, they're not all the same size. We didn't want to just make same size groups. We really wanted it to be based on the input data and what logically went together. So extensive resources accounts for 7% of all the HE providers in the HESA data that we looked at, whereas teaching focused accounts for 20%. If we look at a little bit more detail of the sort of metrics that we've used to create these groups, we've looked at the percentage of students that have come from low participation neighbourhoods. We've looked at percentage of students who are going on to do postgrad research, income per student, the number of subjects that are delivered by that HE provider on average, obviously, when we're looking within the group, and then the NSS overall satisfaction. So if we look at extensive resources, just as an example, 6% of students come from low participation neighbourhoods on average within the group, but they're all tightly bound around that. 12% of students do postgrad research. The income per student is obviously quite high, almost £42,000, and a very broad range of subjects, 21.5 subjects are delivered. If we compare that to specialists, as we've termed them, actually have a slightly higher percentage of low participation neighbourhood students, much lower percentage of students doing postgrad research, a lower income per student, and a much tighter number of subjects delivered. Only 6.47 as an average here. And then the last final comparator is the teaching focused. So quite a high 10% of students from low participation neighbourhoods. Again, not really focused on driving postgrad. It is all around trying to teach the subjects and maybe more vocational, etc. So 2% of students go on to do postgrad, about £10,500 income per student. But again, a broad range of subjects within the group and within each university, almost 20 subjects delivered. So that sort of gives you an idea of the sort of metrics we've included. We know it's not exhaustive, and actually there's maybe more that could be added that would make sense, or some of these may be not quite the right ones, but I think it gives us a good starting point to start to look at these segments. So what does that, what else does that tell us? what we're trying to do is show that these groupings behave differently. And if they behave differently from the input data, it's quite likely that the expectation is they'll behave differently across segments from an NS point of view. Maybe the expectations of what students have within each of these segments will be different across the segments. So here, just to show an example of how they are different. So if we look at the percentage from low participation on the x-axis against the percentage doing postgrad research, and then the average income is the size of the bubble, you can see there's clear differences. So we've got local access here, relatively low income per student, a low percentage doing postgrad, but very high percentage of students from low participation neighbourhoods, compared to extensive resources, which is much more focused on postgrad in comparison, much less percentage of students from low participation neighbourhoods, obviously a lot of income, a lot higher income per student. We take that a little bit further and sort of give an idea of how that looks against maybe some of the traditional ways of segmenting. So if we wanted to look at, if any of you are from a Russell Group university, for example, the Russell Group universities actually fall across 3 of our segments. 10 fall within extensive resources, 1 is a mid-size, and 13 are research focused. So you may currently, if you're a Russell University group, Russell Group University, take your NSS data and compare yourself across all within this segment. And what we're saying is actually there might be another angle, and it could be valid to look at both. But if you were a Russell Group and you fell within research focused, it might make more sense to look against all the research focus within our segments. Another way to look at that, if we wanted to look at, for example, the plate glass universities. So how do they compare? So, if we look at plate glass, the majority fall within research focused, but there is 1 in specialist, 2 in teaching focused, 1 in widening access, 1 in extensive resource, and 1 mid-size. Again, you might want to look, again, if you were a plate glass university, instead of just comparing yourself to all the other plate glass, actually see which segment you sit in and look at within that segment, as well as a better comparator from an NSS point of view. The other way I can look at that is if we looked at research focused and how does that split across ancient universities, former colleges. Again, you'll see there's quite a lot of split. So again, it's just trying to give an idea that there could be another way to look at how to compare and who to compare your NSS scores to. And it's when we get within those segments that we're able to drill down more and look at some of the factors that maybe are driving that NSS satisfaction at an overall level and help you focus on the areas to improve, if you need to improve, to try and drive that score up even further. And that's what we'll come on to in more of the analysis. Within all of that, again, just to highlight, we can then look at an individual level. So again, these are the anonymized names. We've got the overall NSS satisfaction, and then some of the summary data we've taken from HESA, and then some of the graduate outcomes as well, which is also obviously really important for us to be able to look at as well. So I'm not going to dwell on that, but I will come back later to a provider level piece of analysis so you can just see that in a little bit more detail. So again, just to highlight how these variations actually play out from an NS point of view. So I'm looking at 4 of our segments here: the extensive resources, the research focused, the widening access, and the teaching focused. And then looking across the question categories within NSS, so questions 1 to 4, 5 to 7, and so on. And these are, by each of these segments, the satisfaction scores as an average for that segment across those question categories. So you can see that there is some similarity in the shape. So, you know, certainly on questions 5 to 7, each of the 4 segments are scored a similar amount. But there's actually quite a divergence across the groups when you look at questions 8 to 11. Now, it might be that, you know, it's not important to score well if you're an extensive resourced university in those areas. And again, that's what we wanted to come on to in further detail. But I think, again, it just highlights where, you know, it could be more valuable to compare yourselves within some segments that are built on some of the data from HESA to get a better insight. You can actually see even more of a difference if we look at where some of the smaller universities based on number of students are. So that we've got the local access, the mid-size and the specialist. And again, whilst there is a similar pattern, again, there are quite a lot of differences in the NSS performance. So again, why it's important to compare yourself within those segments and drill into that a little bit more detail. We wanted to then try and see, so within these segments, what appeared to be most important from a point of view of driving overall NSS satisfaction. So which of the question areas appear to be most highly correlated, and I will point out it is correlated, not causation, but it starts to give us a guide, which seem to be the most highly correlated with overall NSS score. And the yellow stars are those where the correlation is over 85%, so the highest and most strong correlation. So if we look at our extensive resource segment, actually most of the question groupings appear to be very highly correlated with overall satisfaction. So that would appear to suggest that, you know, actually all of them are important, and the student, when they come to score, the overall satisfaction they have reflect on all of those question areas as being important. If we look at actually specialist and widening access, whilst there are clearly ones that are of higher correlation to others, I mean, that one is down at 41%. None of them are actually very highly correlated over 85%. But I'm going to focus on teaching focus because I'll go down into an individual provider level just to show you how you can start to use this. So there's 3 areas that seem to be the most important if you sit within the teaching focus segment. So questions 1 to 4, the teaching on my course seems to be very highly correlated. The learning opportunities, questions 5 to 7, and academic support, questions 12 to 14. So if I was looking at this and I was within that segment, I would then want to start to think about, well, how have I performed in those areas? And if I see a need, and I'm sure we're all trying to keep improving and driving extra performance, they're the areas I'm going to want to start to look at in a little bit more detail if I want to try and drive up my overall NSS satisfaction score. So moving on into a little bit more detail now, and actually starting to take that down into a question level. So I'm going to focus, like I said, I'm going to go into teaching focused. So this is looking within the teaching focus segment. And what we've then looked to do is how does individual questions correlate with overall satisfaction? And within this segment, actually question 15 is an individual question. And what we've got here is the score for question 15 on the x-axis against overall NSS satisfaction on the y. And these are the individual HE providers within our teaching focus segment. And apart from a couple of outliers at the sort of lowest score level for question 15, that you can see they're quite tightly correlated across this trend here. So question 15 actually comes out as the most important or the most highly correlated question with overall NSS satisfaction. And on average, within this segment, if you were able to increase your question 15 score by an absolute 7%, so that's moving, for example, from 74 to 81%, you could actually on average increase in absolute terms overall satisfaction by, it's 1%, it's actually probably nearer 1.5 in this particular case. So again, that might move your overall score from 81 to 82%. So really starting to get into what are the individual areas we need to really focus on, and then obviously work through, well, how can we do that and how can we drive those? And what would be nice to be able to do, we haven't done any trends in any historical analysis, is see how that changes over time, and see whether improved performance in these questions actually does drive overall satisfaction up further. Just because I know what's coming up on, just to highlight, so we've also got question 12. So if you remember back to the previous page we looked at, questions 12 to 14 were really important as a group, and actually question 12 as an individual is actually the 6th highest ranking question to focus on to drive overall satisfaction up. We can then look at that, we can look at all the individual providers in there. I'm actually going to focus down on one. I'm going to focus down on Lavender Town and drill through to that provider. So we've got Lavender Town University, sits within our teaching focus segment, and has an overall NSS satisfaction of 69%. The most studied course is business and management, and 36% of students are studying that course. So what we want to do now is look at how it's performing. We've got an overall score of 69%. How can we see where we could drive improvements in that score? The outer line you can see is the highest score achieved by any provider that sits within our teaching focus segment. So if we look at questions 1 to 4, one of the providers has scored 84% in that question segment. If we look at questions 23 to 25, the highest scored is 78%. Now, they may be different providers. It's just to give a guide of what has one provider been able to achieve. Similarly, with the inner line, we've got the lowest score by any particular provider. So the lowest score in question group 5 to 7 is 68%. Questions 8 to 11 is 54%. But we're looking at Lavender Town, and Lavender Town then is the middle line. How have they scored within those groupings? And we can see from the question groups 1 to 4 and 5 to 7, they're actually performing really well. In fact, they're pretty much, near top for question group 5 to 7. However, if we look at question groups 12 to 14 and 15 to 17, they're one of the lowest scoring. And if you remember back to the last 2 pages we've been through, 12 to 14 is very important and very highly correlated with overall satisfaction score. And question 12 was the 6th most important question as individual question. And question 15 was the most important from a correlation with overall satisfaction score. So it would appear to suggest that the areas to focus on to drive overall NSS satisfaction would be these 2 areas. And a good focus there and an improvement in scores here is more likely to drive an improvement and an increase in the overall NSS satisfaction. So that's the sort of the way we thought this would start to be useful, is to give a better understanding of actually where should I put my resources, what appears to be important for students when they're thinking through what's my overall satisfaction, which are the questions that they've addressed and answered are the ones we should focus through on. And like I said, if we could then maybe drill down further and start to look at historical, we could get an understanding whether that has always been the case and how improvements have been made over time and how that relates to the actual outputs and outcomes we've seen from an NSS point of view. Just to give you a little bit more detail for Lavender Town, So we wanted to look at, which questions have they performed most above the segment average. So learning community, I feel part of a community of staff and students. 63% agreed against a segment average of 57 and against an overall across all providers of 58. So they're performing, much higher than both the providers within their segment, but also against all providers in that question grouping. And we've put in the top 5 questions versus segment here. Conversely, we can look at where maybe they're scoring not quite as well as the other providers within the segment. So we go here to the one where they're most below, so organisation and management. The course is well organised and running smoothly. They've scored 55% against a segment average of 60, and actually an overall across all providers of 62. So it's again another way of saying, how are they performing? How are their direct comparators performing? But again, overlaying that with what seems to be important from an NSS point of view. Now, we understand there will be other factors that will drive importance as well. So, it's not just saying it's the ones that drive NSS. There could be other reasons for looking at other questions as well. But we've started to tease out, again, how high maybe could you expect? What if you want to set yourself a measure of where you want to get your score to for in the next year? Well, actually, we could increase that from 55, so we came up to the segment average. That would maybe be a good start. So starts to help drive those sort of areas to improve and how to improve. We know it's obviously not all about the scores. We then obviously care about what happens to the graduates. What are their outcomes as they go on in their career? So again, keeping within the 7 segments we've got, one of the things we've looked at is the percentage earning a high salary when the survey is done, which is 15 months after roughly they graduate. And extensive resource universities, 46% of graduates are earning over £30,000, compared to, again, if we stay with our teaching focus, 18%. Now, we know that's not the be all and end all. That's not everything. That's not necessarily what the students care about. It's not what they look to achieve and the sort of courses they're on, etc. So we also wanted to look at is how their activities fit with current plans and how well tied their learning is to their current activities. So if we look here, again, by our 7 segments, and what we're looking at is my current activity fits with my future plans, how that's been scored, and we've got the lower bound, the upper bound, the quartile range, the median and the mean. So for our extensive resource group, it's actually quite tightly bound. So for a lot of students, they're, and the scores are quite high as well. They really see that their current activities fit with their future plans. If we look at our specialist group, I was quite surprised, and I'd be interested to hear any thoughts on this, but the range is actually really, really large, even within the quartile as well. So it would appear that, for some students, their current activities really fit with their future plans. But for others, it's actually a long way away, and there's quite a range in that. Now, maybe our thought was, if you're doing a more specialist course, that would be very much fitted to what you're going on to do in the future career. But maybe this is just a reflection on the marketplace as we've come out of COVID, and maybe certain jobs and roles aren't available. And again, maybe this would be one to look at interestingly over time and see how maybe that has changed. And then on a sort of similar vein, if we look at how students think, how well they're utilising what they learned during their studies against their current activities. So again, extensive resource, quite tightly bound, not scoring as highly this time, but still quite tightly bound. So students are on the whole feeling that they're using what they learnt. Again, specialist grouping seems to have quite a range. And again, some people really rate highly how much they're using what they learnt in their current activities, some much less so. And again, there's a big quartile range. I think that what that sort of peaks in us is, whilst we've looked at this at an overall provider level, what we probably want to start to look at is drill down more into subjects as well. And how does that reflect on how you should compare yourselves from an NSS view and a graduate outcomes? So it might be that you perform the analyses at an overall level, but then maybe for some key subject areas, you'd want to, really focus in and re-segment based on subject. And if we pull out specialists as an example, the providers we have put in specialists, if you remember, they on average had just about 6.5 subjects were what they provided. There's a quite a large percentage of them focus on subjects related to medicine, but a lot are focused on creative arts and design. So, whilst we've created this segment to compare providers within our specialist grouping, because they're tightly focused on certain subjects and the sort of income, etc., they have, actually it then probably makes sense to start to split this out further and maybe do some segments around the particular courses. So if you wanted to look at creative art and design, are there providers that also provide those courses that are still similar to us? So maybe still have similar levels of income, similar percentage students from low participation neighbourhoods, etc. So it's just another way and another angle, and see how that might reflect on how NSS had performed, etc., and whether it was worth drilling down into anything further. And again, would be interesting to start to see that over a time frame, etc. So I think that's where we wanted to get to today, to start to show that we think there's a different way of being able to think through this. And tease out where to drive, even better graduate outcomes, even better NSS satisfaction. But I'll open it up to questions and any thoughts anyone has, and any comments we gladly receive as well.
So great, just one from me. So we've looked at the data quite a bit, and obviously you've analysed it. What was the most surprising piece of analysis that you got from data that you didn't expect to see?
I think it was being able to tease out the questions that most highly correlated with overall satisfaction. Because I think that's when this starts to get useful. It's all right knowing, I'm maybe whoever you compare yourselves to, whether it's, this data-led logical segmentation, or whether it's, we've got traditional universities or other providers that we compare ourselves to. But you've then got 25 questions, and you need to know which levers to be able to pull to make improvements. So the fact that, if I select on local access, just to show that there are differences, starting to know actually where I should maybe focus, where is going to have the best impact. So actually question 15 comes out quite a lot in some of the groups, but it is different by the groups. So I think that's the key for me. That's ultimately, we want the insight to drive an outcome. So if we can help focus more on a particular area that appears to be more highly correlated with overall satisfaction, and that leads to more satisfied students and then better graduate outcomes, that's the key bit for me.
And I think it's really important, because a lot of the time we can collect a lot of data, but unless we're analysing it and investigating how we can use it, it often can kind of not actually be seen as valuable. But when you explore it exactly the way you've done, there's actually actionable insights as a result of it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about data driven. I actually, I don't agree with data driven. I think it's decision driven. So we've thought through this about, we want to make decisions. We want to make decisions on where we can improve student satisfaction, and then when you focus that way, it lets you some data to be able to address that and point us in the right places, so we know how to look into it, and which levers to pull. And like I say, the next stage is, if we've had an action, we've looked at question 15, we've put some programs in place that we believe will improve our performance in that area. Obviously, the next year you want to first check, has it led to an improvement in that area? Do students see the benefit? Have they noticed that it is even better and scored more highly on the back of that? And did that also then lead through to an increase in overall satisfaction, which we hope that they get, and an increase in the graduate outcomes as well? So it's important to have that continual feedback loop and make sure you're using where you've done interventions as a way of then checking whether that's worked as you expected it to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really interesting. Fab. Well, if anyone's got any questions, please just come off mute and ask. Okay, got one in chat. Are there any rules in question formulations and how to score them, from Femi? I don't know if you want to come off of mute, Femi, at all, or if you want to divulge in it, or if that's enough.
Yeah, I just noticed that some of the questions scored higher. So initially, when you're asking the questions, are there any kind of templates or rules in forming these questions?
Yeah, so this is the NSS data, so it's not us asking the questions, it is the actual survey that's run, and we've just accessed that data to be able to look at that. So they're all scored from, if I remember rightly, it's sort of definitely agree, mostly agree, neither agree nor disagree, mostly disagree, definitely disagree. I think also what would be useful to tease out more insight is to split out the way of looking at the scores across those 5 categories. I know the way, and we've kept it how NSS is currently presented, where it groups together mostly agree and definitely disagree. So what percentage of students have scored one of those 2? But you could argue there's quite a significant difference. If 70% of students scored mostly agree, for you as a provider, and you compared that to another provider and 70% scored definitely agree, they're currently equated. Well, they're not, because definitely agree is much stronger than mostly agree. And I would probably want to know that difference if I was looking at this in a real big level of detail. So I think that's another next step, along with the historical analysis, is actually start to split that out more. That answer your question, Hel?
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you.
Right. Any other thoughts? I'd love to know, if anyone's prepared to say how they compare themselves currently and whether they think looking at this from a different angle. I mean, obviously, working on this, the other aspect you could build in is put your own groupings in and compare in a similar way with your own segments, and then see how that would differentiate against using the HESAR data, and where there might be, you could flag up which providers that are in both what you compare to now and HESAR would suggest you should compare to, the way we've clustered, and which ones are outside. You can play it both ways to give you a full picture.
Graham, a question from me. You've obviously done this with the data that is available in the public domain. I know you've anonymised the information.
Yeah.
How long has it taken you and the team just to sort of pull this together and start doing the analysis as well? So just to give, the guys are already looking at that data anyway, but want to start thinking about different ways of going in and analysing, just roughly.
Yeah.
How much time has it taken to get this kind of set up?
I think, I mean, end to end, 3 weeks, that's not all, actually analyses. We obviously put quite a lot of thought to this. We wanted to make sure there was a good logical flow. You're sort of stepping down and I call it unpeeling the onion, getting to further and further insights as you go along. Then doing the analyses, nothing's ever perfect with data. So, you have a look through, do these clusterings make sense? What might we tweak? What other techniques might we use? And then bringing it all together into the Power BI. So there's probably about 2 weeks of work, but about 3 weeks of time to actually build.
Well, I'm not sure if any other questions are coming through, but if there are any more, just shout. Graham, if you don't mind just going back onto the PowerPoint slide, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. So I suppose if there's any more questions, please just pop them in the chat. I've put my details down here. So if anyone wants to reach out, hopefully you found this session insightful. And if you want to explore it a little bit further with Graham and myself, I've got my email address and my number there to kind of continue this conversation on, hopefully, with you. We do have a few QR codes, so you can just scan these off of the screen. The one on the left is for our higher education LinkedIn page. We're publishing a lot of content on there at the moment, from our blogs to information about our events, etc. So it's really worth a read, and just continues this kind of collaborative partnership and the conversation to keep going. Finally, we do have the other QR code on the right. So we do ask if you could spare 2 minutes at the end of this call, just to do a bit of a survey to give us a bit of feedback on how you found today's session. Anything you want to hear about next, that's really helpful for us, and then we can just reach out to you, especially if you want to explore what this data could look like for your university specifically. We've got another higher education hub as well in about 6 to 8 weeks, which we're hosting with UCISA, but we will be sharing all details of that on our LinkedIn page and sending it out to you. So keep an eye out for that. It should be a really good session. So if there's nothing else, no other questions, thanks everyone for today. Thanks, Graham, for running through that. Really appreciate it, and hopefully it's been interesting and you've all taken something from it. So, Graham, I don't know if you want to say anything else, or if we're.
No, that's I like I say, I hope it's led to some further thinking. I know it's quite a lot to take in, but as you say, if anyone wants to chat through further, understand a little bit more detail, happy to have any follow-up conversations.
Perfect, amazing. Well, thank you, everyone. Sorry, Nathan.
Sorry, very, very quickly, I noticed this session is being recorded. Will you be sharing that with us as well?
Yeah, we will. We'll have the recording straight after the session, so it will be sent out to everyone, and we post it on our YouTube page as well. So we'll make sure you get a copy of it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Femi. Perfect. Well, thanks, everyone. And I'll speak to you all soon, I'm sure. But I appreciate you all spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you all. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, bye.
Right.